Hi, it's Mike Stevenson here. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the next in the series of test and logic apps, and we're going to take a look at an example of a try-catch workflow and how we can test that. Now, this will let us test conditions within the workflow, and also we'll be looking at how to do additional assertions beyond what we've looked at in the previous videos. So let's jump in. Now, here I am in my Logic App project, and over on the over on the left, we're in the Logic App folder, and we're in the try catch workflow. Now, if we go over to the workflow screen here, you'll see this is basically a workflow where we trigger it with an HTTP message, just vanilla trigger. We're then going to call out to Google inside a try block, and we just basically call Google's main URL. We then compose a result, so we're going to basically give a text message saying what the status of calling Google was, and we'll return that with a 200 if it's successful. So that's inside the try area here. Now further down, we've used a scope in the typical try-catch pattern. And if you notice the little red icon here, tells us this only runs when the above scope fails. So we're going to implement some error handling. And we're basically just going to compose a response here. So we're just going to give it a very simple message that we then return back to the caller. Now, if we think about the challenge of test and logic apps, this is where the Microsoft unit testing framework really starts coming into its own, because the problem I have when I'm testing with a deployed logic app is I can't make Google fail, or it's unlikely I'll make Google fail. Most of the time I'll get a 200 response back. And that's going to be very true for most of the systems you'll integrate when you do an automated test. And a lot of the times they're going to give you a successful response, so it becomes really difficult to test your exception handling logic. So, the chances are for the developer, the first time this catch block is going to get executed is in production when you've got something breaks. So the test framework makes it easy for us to start testing that functionality much earlier in the development cycle. So in advance of the video, I've created a sample in my test folder down here. So you can see we've got the Logic App folder, and we're in the try catch example. So I've generated from a run history a test, and I've basically got some C# we can go through to have a look at how this is going to be tested. Okay, so if I just zoom out slightly. Okay, so I've really got two tests in this class. So you can see we've got a standard test class here. We've got the initialize, and then the first test we're going to look at is this green path one here. So we're going to create our action mocks, and we're going to prepare the trigger mock here. So we're going to pass in some data to trigger it, and then here we're going to specify the call to Google. So this HTTP action, we're going to mock this, and we're going to use a new action mock here, and we're basically going to pass in this OK response, for the OK HTTP status code here. So that sets that action up to give us a good response. If we scroll a bit further down, we've got the typical code you'll see in all tests for the act section. So we create the test execution framework, the workflow gets loaded up, we pass in the mocks and it triggers it, and then the default Microsoft assertions kick in here to make sure that the workflow succeeded, and that's it. So we don't really know what happened in the workflow, we just know that it either succeeded or it didn't succeed. So this is where we're going to go to the next level and add some custom assertions. So if I go a bit further down here, the first thing we're going to do is here I'm going to get references to the try action and the catch action from the run history. So this test run we get back gives us an object model inside it where we've got all the different actions that have happened and we can assert their statuses, and effectively it's the run history. Now, one of the things I kind of fell into a little trap of is I hadn't really thought about the fact that the actions are nested inside each other. So if I think of the actions I'm going to test, the first thing is some of them are inside the try block and some of them are inside the catch block over here. So I need to get references to those so I can just pull them out of the actions and I can access their child actions later on. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to assert that the try block completed successfully. So you can see here I've said we expect the workflow status to have succeeded to match the try action status. So in this case, this is the green path test. We know that the try scope was successful. Next up down here, we're now going to test the HTTP call to Google. So the key thing to note here is I've specified the try action and I've asked for its child actions. And then here I've specified the name of the HTTP action. So I'm looking for the status of that action. And we're going to check here that, the expected bit, we're checking that it was succeeded. So that'll tell me the HTTP action to Google was successful. Now, what we've got to remember here as well is technically that action isn't actually calling Google because we're mocking it. So really what it's doing is we're doing the assertion that when the workflow runs, it actually gets this this status code that we supplied in the mock earlier on. Now, if we go a bit further down, we can see here we've got an assertion that the response action was successful. And then finally, we've got an assertion that the catch block was skipped, which I think is a good one to do. So if you think about the number of times you forget to turn off the bit that makes a catch block run when it's successful, you only want it when the try fails. So we can make sure with an assertion here that the catch block didn't get executed. So that's a really solid green path test now. And we know that that HTTP action would be successful. Now, next up, we've got another test operation here where we're going to test an error scenario. So we're going to make sure that the call to Google with the HTTP action, if that fails, what do we do? So if we scroll a bit down, you can see we've got the same scenario setting up the trigger mockup here. But the key bit that changes is this bit here for the action for Google. So we've specified the HTTP action mock. We've then said the status is going to be a failure and the HTTP error code is a bad request, and we can put a custom message in here if we want. So I'm assuming we can probably put some JSON in there and that kind of thing, and we can add this to the action mocks down here. We then do the usual code to trigger the test execution of the workflow. We take the Microsoft assertions that the run was as we expect. And then if we go a bit further down, this is where we start putting our own assertions in again. So we get the reference to the try and the catch block. And then here, we're checking that the status code for that Google action was a failure. And that tells us that we started executing it, but we got an error from that action. I can probably dig a bit deeper to potentially, from that action, check things like the error message maybe and that kind of thing if I want to. In this case, I'm just keeping it quite simple. Here we're testing the try action. The try scope failed. So, we would expect that scope fails, which will trigger the catch. I can do a check here, the response shape that we have in the workflow. We expect that shouldn't be executed, so we can check that it was skipped. Again, making sure that the workflow jumped down to the catch block. And then the final two bits down here, we can check that the catch block executed successfully. And we can also check that I think we had a compose shape in there, or a response shape. So that response that returned an error, we check that that succeeded. So basically we've got two tests that check the different actions run as expected in the scenario where that call to Google fails. Now if I go over to my test explorer here, so we go to my try catch example and we'll just run these. You can see I've got two tests there for green path and for error calling Google, so we'll just let them run through. You can see that ran through nice and quick there, and you can see we've got two green tests, so we're all good in this scenario. So hopefully today's video showed you a nice way where we can test a try-catch example, so that'll help people for many of the common implementations of that pattern. And we also looked at some additional ways to assert different actions within the workflow that got executed. Thank you for listening, and we hope you're enjoying this testing series.